Letter number 4, Biblical Archaeology. As a 1960 undergraduate obliged to take a theology course, it was incumbent to own a Bible. Since the one on sale in the university bookstore came leather-bound, gilt-edged, and cost the exorbitant sum of $28, I decided to take San Francisco's No. 5 McAllister bus line downtown to investigate one of the city's used bookshops. With no difficulty at all, I found a sturdy, black-covered edition for $2. Even with the 30-cent round-trip bus fare, I had saved myself more than $25. Back at the dormitory, I leafed through the new acquisition, wondering if exceedingly small print made my thrift look foolish. Tucked between the pages, I found a yellowing news clipping cached by a previous owner. The slip bore a date 30 years before from a Florida daily newspaper. The short article, I recall, described a huge whale washing ashore. Penciled into the margin were the words, "Big enough for Jonah." Such was my introduction to biblical inerrancy. Then, rudimentary cetacean biology would have been sufficient. Today, inerrancy is on a collision course with state-of-the-art archaeology, with no less at stake than the Exodus, Solomon's Temple, and the United Monarchy itself. Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman, two Israeli archaeologists, set out their case in The Bible Unearthed, Archaeology's New Vision of Ancient Israel and the Origin of its Sacred Texts, published in 2001. In a nutshell, what's in the ground doesn't match the facial history. One difficulty is the anachronisms. Recall Shakespeare's hoary gaffe when a character in Julius Caesar hears a clock chiming. The book of Judges describes thrilling victories by the Israelites over the various peoples of Canaan: Midianites, Moabites, Jebusites, Philistines, and Ammonites. The problem is that the towns destroyed in biblical chronology do not exist until 400 years later. Key to the new understanding is the advent of survey archaeology. Instead of excavating isolated tells, that is, mounds, and segregating potsherds into clumps, survey archaeology commends a regional approach. This serves to organize the questions asked. Was there a prevailing culture, a political system, a central authority, a pattern of trade? Did population centers suffer a common demise? Great advances have also occurred in deciphering the extra-biblical record, not a negligible source. Israel's first appearance in a non-biblical text is the Merneptah Stela, named for the son of King Ramses II, who ruled Egypt between 1279 and 1213 before the Common Era. Israel appears as a group decimated not in Egypt, but by Merneptah's foray into Canaan. According to Finkelstein and Silberman, Israelites emerged only gradually as a distinct group in Canaan, beginning at the end of the 13th century BCE. There is no recognizable archaeological evidence of Israelite presence before that time." Close quote. Based upon internal biblical dating and correlative dates for royal Egyptian and Assyrian reigns, the Exodus is supposed to have taken place in 1440 BCE, roughly 250 years before Israelites appear in the archaeological record. In Egyptian inscriptions, such as the extensive cuneiform archive found at Tel el Amarna, giving extensive descriptions of social, political, and demographic conditions in Canaan, there is no mention of the name Israel. There were indeed Semitic, even Canaanite peoples in the Nile Delta, for instance, the Hyksos, circa 1670 to 1570 BCE. The region's relative fertility was hard to resist for nearby desert-dwelling tribes, crushed periodically by great droughts. But did these Canaanites include the Israelites? The Bible Unearthed says no. The likelihood is that as part of much later nation building, The Israelites simply appropriated a familiar regional tale, favoring Canaanites against their more powerful neighbor. Did David and Solomon exist? Asked Finkelstein and Silberman. They quote biblical minimalist Thomas Thompson, whom I heard lecture in Jerusalem's Old City one evening in October, and Niels Peter Lemche, to the effect that King David, quote, is no more a historical figure than King Arthur, close quote. The minimalists have their points, according to the two archaeologists. Quote, a close reading of the biblical descriptions of the days of Solomon clearly suggests that this was a portrayal of an idealized past, a golden age. Compare, for example, Solomon's fabulous wealth, silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, and Solomon's harem housing 700 wives and princesses and 300 concubines. Archaeological evidence in Jerusalem for the famous building projects of Solomon is non-existent, state Silberman and Finkelstein. 19th and early 20th century excavations around the Temple Mount in Jerusalem failed to identify even a trace of Solomon's fabled temple or palace complex, state Finkelstein and Silberman. And once again, despite all their reported riches and power, David and Solomon appear in nary an Egyptian or Mesopotamian inscription. And what of a united monarchy, the grand biblical hope of reconnecting the two fraternal dynasties, Israel in the north and Judah in the south? The Book of Kings sets the scene. Israel's history swings from unity to schism and from schism to national catastrophe. Falling prey to idolatry, the northern kingdom founds cult centers after the glorious reigns of David and Solomon, who had ruled all Israel from Jerusalem. 200 years of disastrous division and hatred follow. Finally, the northern state pays for its sins, ceasing to exist and exiling its 10 lost tribes. But there's no compelling archaeological evidence for a vast united monarchy centered in Jerusalem that encompassed the entire land of Israel, declare Finkelstein and Silberman. To the contrary, excavation reveals a slow demographic transformation in the Judean highlands, where an ethnic consciousness gradually emerged. This was always the poorer, weaker, more rural, and less influential, until it rose to sudden, spectacular prominence after the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel. It was, in fact, its remoteness, backwardness, and poverty that shielded Judea from marauders intent on the spoils of softer targets. This allowed Jerusalem to escape outside plunder and develop theology and material culture. What the biblical historian gives us, then, is both a cautionary tale and a brief in support of expansionary aims predicated on the existence of a mythical lost kingdom. Needless to say, in Israel, where accusations of harming the state fly like leaves in a gale, Bible Unearthed has disturbed more than a few. Finkelstein, however, does not back off. The evidence speaks for itself, and as to the effect the archaeology may have on Israel's modern claims to statehood, he declares this question is not one decided by academics, and that he is happy, together with his family, to mark the Passover in Tel Aviv.